before we started, I wrote down some things like, here's what I think is harming teacher retention and recruitment. I'd like to lay some things out. You tell me if you think I'm off base or I missed anything or overrated. And the first one is I put first on purpose, but the others are in no particular order, okay? The first one is the overall economic environment, right? There's a shortage of teachers, but there's also, I own a bakery, there's a shortage of dishwashers. And, to your point, that there's just nobody standing in line. It's like, yeah, that's true economy-wide, right? It's hard to find people because people are largely employed. And being a government entity kind of harms that, right? Because in my business, when I have somebody turn over, I just like, well, if I can't recruit you at X, I'm going to try to recruit you at X plus 2, right? And I know, and I can raise my prices if I need to, and you guys can't, right? You can give raises basically once a year. And so I think the overall economic picture is a big driver that's hurting teacher retention and recruitment. And then there's a lot of things here that we can control. Go ahead.
Just real fast, I think it's important to note that the teacher shortage started prior to the overall labor shortage. We were having extreme difficulty getting quality teachers before the labor shortage started.
And I'm about to get to the reasons why I think that's the case. We hold teachers accountable for things that they cannot control. And I think that is unfair to do to anybody, and it creates a work environment that I just would never ask any of my employees to do that. But we're politicians, and we respond to political incentives, and so we hold teachers accountable for things that they cannot control. And I think the biggest example of that is we hold them accountable for their students' performance on tests, and then we tell the students you don't have to take the test if you don't want to. And there are just so many high-performing kids who have really involved parents who think, I don't want you to take that test. And that is entirely outside the teacher's control, and we hold the teacher accountable for that result. And no wonder we have trouble keeping people in this profession. Number 2, we tie their hands in doing their job. And that comes from a lot of different places. District policies sometimes do that. Certainly state policies do that. Federal policies do that a lot too, right? Like we tell you to manage a successful classroom. Oh, but you've got a kid who is constantly causing disruptions. There's nothing you can do about that. And that sort of hand tying, I don't know what the solution to that is, but I do know that it creates a difficult work environment. And anybody who is in there who does not have the power to control their work environment in a way that makes them productive, it just creates a stressful and an undesirable work environment. Next, a lack of support and help. I think this is really tied to the top one, where we have an overall economy. We've talked about that before, that they're not, it's nice. Some teachers stay after and vacuum their own classroom, and some of them do that because they want their classroom to look exactly the way it is. And some of them do that because there's not a janitor who will vacuum my classroom. And so I have to take time that I would like to spend at home with my family or at home grading these essays that are going to make me replace my red pens too often, right? Yeah. It just continues to add to the time burden of being that kind of employee when there's not that help and support. And teachers love their students, and it's painful to watch them. It's like we don't have adequate supervision at recess, and so they're more likely to get hurt. And anyway, all kinds of reasons why a lack of support for the teacher, I think, is leading to lower teacher retention. And then compensation is one of those two. And I think that's much more of a retention issue than a recruitment issue. The starting wage for teachers is actually pretty good for a recent college graduate, but the way that I see things, there's kind of an overall size problem with the compensation package, but that becomes a bigger issue later in your career, in my opinion. I think that we don't have a high enough ceiling for teachers on their earnings. So there's not a lot of potential growth. And I think that contributes to, after 5 years, people look at the salary schedule and think, well, I can continue to get $800 raises every year, and that's something. But that basically keeps me at par, with what my earnings are. And if I really want to be able to grow my family's wealth and abilities, other industries offer greater growth potential. And part of that brings us back to something that we've talked about before, is that there's a lack of differential pay based on market realities. And I think that's because there's just kind of a culture in education that says teachers are all valuable and we love them all. And I totally understand that. And I've been in education for 20 years, so I get it. But I think that we're not going to solve an overall compensation problem if we go into it knowing that the very best teachers are going to have no greater earning potential than the mediocre teacher, who has no greater earning potential than the well below average teacher. And there are areas where there are real shortages, like with all respect to English teachers, there are just more potential English teachers than there are potential math or special education teachers. And if the market doesn't recognize that reality, we are not going to solve the problem of a shortage of math and special education teachers. If what we're saying is there's no greater, like we're just going to ignore the supply and demand reality of the market that says there's a greater demand than supply in special ed, but our salary schedule is the way it is, and we hire special education teachers and promote special education teachers at the same rate that we do for teachers, where there's just not that supply and demand differential. And now you can tell me where I'm wrong.
Just a quick comment.